On this, the Washington's birthday,
Yes.
February 22nd, 1965. We're sitting in the office of the Majestic Theater here at, is this 110?
111.
111 West Sheridan. Used to be West Grand.
Mm-hmm.
Many years ago, the office of Mr. Morris Lowenstein, is that correct?
That's right.
Any other initial that I missed?
No.
And there, I think we can preface this whole conversation, which is a part and parcel of the Living Legend Library at Oklahoma Christian College, by saying that, repeating what Mr. Lowenstien mentioned just a few moments ago before we even turned the switch on, that he is the remaining,
The last of the original property
the last
owners,
of the original
property owners
property owners,
still doing business in the same location.
still doing business in the same location. That's been some time ago now, hasn't it?
77 years.
Now, Mr. Lowenstien, when did you come to Oklahoma City?
On June the 1st, 1889.
And how old were you then?
16 months.
16 months.
Yes.
Well, naturally, I'm not going to say do you remember it, but what was the transition? Where did you come from?
Well, I was born in Austin, Texas, and in the meantime, my folks had gone back to New York City.
Uh-huh.
Naturally attracted by the opening, my father decided to make his way to Oklahoma City, which he did, but he was delayed in doing so by the fact that my mother was a little cautious over the fact that it might be an element of danger in making the run, so she persuaded him to wait until 2 weeks afterwards. He came here in the 2 weeks, and we followed him 2 weeks later. Coming to Oklahoma City, he looked for a location. The town had been staked out. The lots were taken by the various people. Houses were going up everywhere. But he came to the location of the theater here and found that occupied by a woman who was covered by 2 men with shotguns. She had staked the lot but couldn't hold it under the regulations.
Right.
He asked her what she would take to move off and give him possession, and they agreed upon terms of $225 cash. She moved off, and my father, who had made his home temporarily in a tent where the Concord building now stands,
Yes, sir.
supervised the building of what was Oklahoma City's first meat market. My father ran this meat market until 1909, when he leased the property for what is now the Majestic Theater. I grew up from the 16-month period to go through the Oklahoma City public schools. My first schooling was in a frame building at what would now be approximately 110 West California. My first teacher was a Mrs. Rice, who later became a Miss Rice, who later became a Mrs. Bradford. From this school, I moved to the Washington School, which had been built by the citizens a few years later. My father and mother were both from Germany, and up until the time I was 6 years old, I could speak no English, or at least not to any great extent. But my schooling did a very nice job for me, and I graduated from the Oklahoma City High School after going through the lower grades. And my first job was a job with Mr. T.P. Mellon, who had opened a department store in Oklahoma City, and I had helped him unpack his initial stock. I worked for him after school in the evenings, and later on became a regular employee. In fact, I took a regular job following my graduation from the Oklahoma City High School, which at that time was the Webster School, now located as a
I'm trying to help you, but I can't at the
I know,
moment.
I'll get as a well, let's skip that for the moment.
All right.
Anyhow, following my graduation, the night of my graduation, I was notified that Mr. Mellon was offering me a position and that I should report at the store the following Monday. This I did, and I found that I was employed in the bundle wrapping department of the department store at a stipend of $12.50 a week. Of course, the people in those days were quite rugged, and they didn't spare your feelings. After working there about a week, I decided that my services were more valuable, and I should have at least $17.50. And I went to Mr. Mellon, and Mr. Mellon said, well, Lowenstein, I don't know what you expect to be, but there's a fellow here working for me that used to be a painter. Not a portrait painter, but a house painter. And today he's the assistant manager of my store. If you have any ambitions, they should be more than the monetary consideration. And I said, well, Mr. Mellon, I can get a job with my old friend, Mr. Seymour Hyman, one of the more prominent citizens of the town at the time, collecting. And it'll make me more than $12.50 a week. Mr. Mellon, in his blunt manner, said, well, if you feel that you want to be a collector all your life, probably you better go down there and get the job. He and I didn't see eye to eye, and I quit. Following my high school graduation, I enrolled at Epworth University, which was the forerunner of the Oklahoma City University, our fine school in Oklahoma City today. And I did the first term there and quit, because I decided that it was time for me to get out and find something that I could devote myself to, and at that time a college education didn't seem quite as important as it does today. I can assure you that if the situation were changed, I'd finish college before I went into business. Following the Oklahoma City University tour, I became a press agent for what was for a vaudeville theater on the old Rock Island track location north of the Skirvin Hotel, which today, of course, embodies the beautiful Civic Center and the cultural center of Oklahoma City. Following this job, after several months, I neglected to say, however, that this location also was the location of the Rock Island Railroad, which bisected the town at the time.
Right.
And whenever the vaudeville show would come on, the switch engines always passed in front of the theater and drowned out the vaudeville.
What was the name of that theater?
That was the Empire Theater, and was conducted by Mr. Abe Feltenstein, who notified me several weeks later that it would be impossible to maintain my services on the stipend, which was then $5 a week as press agent, a part-time job. Slightly dejected, I went down to Mr. Hyman's store, and there I met Mr. John Sinopolo, who later became the reigning amusement purveyor of Oklahoma City, and still is one of our staunchest citizens.
Who was that?
John Sinopolo.
Sinopolo.
Yeah. Mr. Sinopolo was the recipient of the first story I told, and this is quite coincidental with the fact that today is Washington's birthday.
Right.
He asked me what I was doing, and I told him I was press agent at the Empire Theater. And he said, how much are you earning? And I said, $15 a week. And Mr. Sinopolo said, I can use you out of my Delmar garden at $12.50. Would you like the job? I said, I'll take it. And I was quite thrilled to get it. I have since told Mr. Sinopolo of my imposition upon his faith, and he gets quite a chuckle out of it. This proved to be quite a valuable job, and was the beginning of what little success I may have had. It broke me into the newspaper business, and from there I went to the Oklahoman, the Old Times Journal, the Daily Pointer, an afternoon paper edited by Mr. Omer K. Benedict, which later went out of business, selling out and becoming the Oklahoma City Times. Incidentally, I might say in the meantime the town has grown considerably. Speaking of the Oklahoman, I was a newsboy at the age of 6, selling papers on the streets, and when I cried my wares on Main Street, they could very easily hear me on Grand Avenue because of the interspace between the buildings, which hadn't quite all been constructed yet. Baron Housen, another old-time Oklahoma Cityan, was the circulation manager for the Oklahoman. I followed the Oklahoman down to California and Broadway, over to Robinson and California, and then went with the Times Journal, but never did work for them at 4th and Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
I recall the fact that at that time the outstanding hotel of Oklahoma City was the Grand Avenue Hotel, with a nice bar in connection. All the big weddings of the town were held at the Grand Avenue Hotel.
Where was that, sir?
On in the block just west of here, one block west of the theater.
West of the theater, uh-huh.
Another item that I recall is the fact that across the street from the Grand Avenue Hotel were 6 two-story wooden buildings,
Mm-hmm.
which another one of our outstanding citizens, Mr. Henry Overholser, had moved down here from Wichita, Kansas.
Hmm.
The buildings were semi-commercial with living quarters above, and with 6 of them they took the place of what is now the Concord building.
Hmm.
They were really old-day landmarks. Mr. Concord, who built the building and later on became quite wealthy in oil, built his home at 13th and Hudson,
Yes,
between
sir.
Harvey and Hudson.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Concord built quite a mansion there, particularly for the time in which it was built. Mr. Overholser built his at 15th and Hudson, on a corner which still exists and which they have hopes will someday become one of the viewpoints of history for Oklahoma City.
That's a magnificent home, that
It's a beautiful place.
Overholser home.
And it's in a very roomy location, well situated. However, the location is getting rather aged with the rest of things now,
Uh-huh.
and will, I hope, be preserved. The Concord home has just been taken down, however,
Yes, sir.
by the present tenants of the present owners of the location, the Standard Life Insurance Company,
Uh-huh.
who I understand have acquired the whole block from end to end, which they expect to improve, but they will never take away from the hearts of the Oklahoma Cityans the glory and the grandeur of the first fine homes that were built in this location.
I've been in that Overholser home frequently, Mr. Perry, J. Perry.
J. Perry.
And he's doing a magnificent job in preserving everything that's in it. It's a real historical tour just to walk through there. And I think the people would be most proud to know how splendidly it's being taken care of.
These homes were built shortly after the turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, that location, 13th Street, was quite a way out of town.
Yes, it was at then.
And in those days, we didn't have the transportation facilities that we have today. There were no automobiles.
Uh-huh.
And everybody who went anywhere had a horse or 2 horses and a buggy
Uh-huh.
to get them there. The other method of transportation was the city's city's cabs.
Uh-huh.
The taxi cabs followed them, of course. On the day of the opening of the Overholser home, which was quite an event in Oklahoma City, hundreds of people took the cabs and went up to view the home. It was thrown open for inspection.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed it was a grand sight with its interior murals and its beautiful furnishings, and the fact that these old pioneers had cultural and aesthetic ideas that would be a credit to the town today.
Mr. Lowenstein, in the course of your activity now, what was your father doing? Did he, right on this site, what did he...
My father conducted the meat market here,
Yeah.
and he and my mother were a great working team. They would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and cut the meat for the balance of the day, or for as much of it as possible,
Mm-hmm.
to take care of the customers who came to the store.
Mm-hmm.
In the earlier days, I did what little I could by selling watermelons in front of the place, and next door, of course, was a saloon.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma City had its quota of saloons. This saloon was well regulated. It had a gambling house above, and I was never restricted from entering that saloon. I was never barred, and I would go to the gambling house for change, and I saw those things, and through the experience, I never became overly addicted to any of the habits that they suggested. That recalls to my mind that the old Grand Avenue bar next to the Grand Avenue Hotel, run by the Bennett brothers, who later had the ground where the Criterion Theater is now located, used to welcome me to come in to get change for a 20 if it were the amount that someone had brought that my father couldn't quite handle, or had handled and needed the change to recoup his cash box. And I went in there, and one of the Bennett boys would put me up on the bar and have me recite a little piece that I knew before he changed the money for me. And in this way we both got quite a kick out of the transaction.
Those were interesting times, weren't they, as you look back on them now?
They were times,
probably
of
there.
course, that very few people today can remember. If I may refer back to my school days, recently I had the opportunity of meeting one of my old school teachers. Her age is 93.
For heaven's sake.
She's still living and had the misfortune to fall and break a hip. But I understand that she is completely recovered from that and has recently taken a trip with her daughter. Her name is Mrs. Mary D. Couch, a member of the old pioneer Couch family who made a great place for themselves in the history of early Oklahoma City. Mrs. Couch became principal of the high school that I attended, and later became superintendent of the city schools. She was quite a brilliant woman, and at 93 is really still holding her own. I had another very interesting experience a few weeks ago when I read in the paper of an anniversary celebration of a Mrs. Denham. Mrs. Denham's husband was a soldier in the Spanish-American War who was wounded and had a leg handicap as a result of this wound. I had completely lost track of the family, but as I read the piece it recalled to me that Mrs. Denham was the daughter of Captain A.B. Hammer. Captain Hammer was a pioneer lawyer of Oklahoma City and one of the motivating spirits of the early days. Mrs. Denham is now also in her 93rd year and is living with her daughter in northwest Oklahoma City. We had a great time visiting together and mulling over the facts of the early days.
I can imagine you would. I can imagine it would be a marvelous experience.
It's a marvelous experience, but it's a good deal like I told the Kiwanis group one day when I was addressing them. I had, at that time about 35 years perfect attendance, and now I have 41. They said, what does it take to get 35 years of perfect attendance in anything? And I said, well, it takes dedication and it takes determination, and I'm sorry to say that with it all, it takes age.
Well, I was noticing your very handsome Kiwanis pin.
That pin was given to me by my wife, and the diamond in each location represents a year of attendance.
Well, that's certainly a magnificent record, Mr. Lowenstein. When you were with the newspapers, as you said, in various capacities, undoubtedly. What happened after that?
I finished my newspaper tour. However, there's one interesting thing that I do want to recall before I get off of that. I got onto the Oklahoman because it was a stress period after the killing of our beloved sheriff, George Garrison, here in the early days.
How'd that happen? Do you recall?
He was killed by a Negro lawbreaker, and immediately the newspapers got onto the trail of the thing, and we worked night and day in order to work with the authorities and to help solve the killing. The result was that a Negro who did the killing was hanged, and however, that didn't close my newspaper career, because following my job with Mr. Sinopolo at Delmar Gardens, and Delmar Gardens was the top amusement center of Oklahoma City.
Where was that?
That was located at what is now Reno and Agnew, where the old Yellow Cab Company or Yellow Truck Company.
What all was out there?
Well, they had a beautiful garden fashioned after Delmar Garden in St. Louis.
Yes, sir. I know
Mr.
that one very well.
Sinopolo and his partner, Joe Ray, came down here and opened this garden. It was very successful from the first. The streetcar terminal was at this location,
Uh-huh.
and every Sunday crowds packed jammed the gardens. The approach was a wide stairway which led you up to a higher elevation, and on this higher elevation to your right was a long building that housed a bar.
Mhm.
And in those days liquor flowed freely in Oklahoma City. However, this was all conducted on a high plane, and people enjoyed their visit to Delmar Garden. In connection, they also had a summer theater.
Oh,
And this summer theater brought some of the finest of the early day vaudeville acts to Oklahoma City. Such acts as Virginia Drew Trescott, John L. Sullivan. John L. Sullivan had a manager who wore a 17-karat diamond stud that was held onto his shirt with a chain,
yes.
a gold chain, and it was quite an item. Another one of the outstanding attractions was the band of our beloved John Philip Sousa,
Oh,
and he played all of the fine pieces that he had written for the benefit of the Oklahoma City audiences. It was a very fine music entertainment and a very patriotic occasion when he turned to his patriotic numbers.
it's quite a family thing, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed, and on the lower level, they had a number of attractions. There, I believe, most Oklahoma Cityans saw their first version of the Great Train Robbery, in film.
Uh-huh.
And this lower level was shaded by trees. The floor had been built up to the level to where the branches didn't interfere, and it was a lovely place to go on a Sunday afternoon to sit, to have a glass of beer or soft drink or whatever you desired. Take the family there because it was very well policed, and it was really a high spot in Oklahoma City's early day entertainment locations. Later on, we developed Delmar's Green, which consisted of free acts that were brought in here, high wire acts. Perry the Frogman, I recall, a contortionist, and a great number of other things that were used as bait to bring the people out to the garden on Sunday and during the evenings of the week. And it, as I said, was a very successful operation. In other words, it was the basis of Mr. Sinopoulos' beginnings, and if you know Mr. Sinopoulos, you know he is one of our most substantial citizens.
Yes,
Financially.
that's for sure. Well, in many ways, also.
Yes, indeed. I don't mean to detract from the gentleman's qualities, but I mean that was the beginning of the things where he could make the investments that were great for Oklahoma City as it grew. I think today he's one of the most outstanding downtown property owners that we have.
It's been quite a transition in this downtown,
Oh yes,
hasn't
indeed.
it?
It's very interesting to look back on, and it's very satisfying to have been a part of it.
And the future looks challenging, doesn't it?
I hope so. I know that my father he was very limited in his desires because of the fact that people in those times didn't have the opportunities that we have today. I took him in a Studebaker car that I had just bought, which was as pretty as any of the cars of today. It was so pretty, in fact, that it was a Rio Royal, that I don't think it was too successful from a financial and production standpoint. But it was a car that would, in a great many ways, measure up to those that we're driving today. Everybody was interested in it, and one day I took my father and mother in the car, and we drove down to down to the Canadian River, southwest of Oklahoma City. When I got there, I was rather querulous to think of what my father's impressions were, and I said to him, well, Dad, you know where we are? He said, yes, I know where we are. We're down here at the South Canadian River. I said, well, that's fine. Did you enjoy the ride? I looked at my watch. It had just been 30 minutes. And I said, how long would it have taken you, when the town was first formed, to have driven down here with your horse and buggy, or your horse and wagon? He said, well, if I had have left this morning, I would have gotten back home tomorrow night. And that is a story of the contrasts of today with yesterday. Of course, we have the airplane today, the jet plane, which are delightful instruments of transportation, and the things that we have seen that our parents didn't see. Although they're the ones that pioneered this country and put the strength into it that has brought about these transitions.
In talking with these various people, and it's a marvelous opportunity and quite a privilege for me to be able to really sit and learn as you and many of your contemporaries discuss Oklahoma City in its early days and the drive and the thrust that was behind those people. Just today, recently, we had a talk with Dr. Everett out at the University Medical School, Mark Everett, and I think it's Mark, if I'm not mistaken. He's quite a philosophical guy who applies his theory to the practical application of living. And that seems to have been the process of your parents and a lot of other parents and yourself as you came along.
May I reminisce again? These things come in at times when you can't think of them in chronological form.
Surely.
But in the earlier days, I was the office boy of the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce when it was located at Grand and Robinson, where the Mutual Federal Saving and Loan Building is now located. Clifton George, whom I understand is still alive, or was a short time ago, was the secretary. And he was a very alert and progressive gentleman. Of course, he didn't have the qualifications of Stanley Draper, but at that time we had secured the first reunion of Roosevelt's Rough Riders. And Teddy Roosevelt came down for that reunion. As the office boy for the Chamber of Commerce, or the courier, I was dressed in a Rough Rider uniform, and it was my privilege to deliver the mail that had accumulated to Mr. Roosevelt in the location of the present Santa Fe station, which at that time was a frame building that had been built for the opening. The side track was on the west side of the building, and there is where Mr. Roosevelt's car had been parked. He traveled in a special private car. I went down there, and not accustomed to his gruffness, he almost scared me out before I could hand him his mail. But I found him to be a very delightful gentleman. Incidentally, my earlier job at the Chamber of Commerce consisted in dusting off the pool tables, which there were 2 or 3, and also in cleaning out the cuspidors, which we called spittoons, a relic of bygone days.
Aren't too many of those around anymore, and those that you do see are being used a very highly polished nature and used as a decoration of some sort.
They're classified now as antiques.
The curio, an antique of some sort. And they're hard to come by because I know some
indeed.
people are looking for them.
Following, let me get you want to stop it just a minute? I want to get it back in the trend of thought.
Well, it was your newspaper and then the Chamber of Commerce. When did you get in
Well, I
here
got
at the
into
theater
the show business by going to work for Mr. Snopolo, becoming his press agent, taking over his program, which at that time netted me a tremendous amount of money, $60 a week, and truly that was equal to about 4 times the spending power of today.
Right.
So I was doing very nicely. I determined then that I was going to be in the show business, but I had to do a tour first in the clothing business. And I went to work for Bear's Keystone, one of the old landmarks at 131 West Main. Morris Bear was a traveling man for Rice, Sticks and Fuller.
Oh yeah, out of St. Louis.
Later retired and has since died. I worked there for a period of several years, and the young man who was in charge of the store, in fact he and I ran the store, and Mr. Bear came in at convenient times, and one day when he came in, this manager informed him that I was going to quit, all unknown to me. My father and I had come into possession of the theater, which had been built by one of Oklahoma City's real early theater men, B.H. Powell, and we'd run into legal complications which resulted in us taking over the theater following a fire after they had leased the theater to other parties, and we opened it up as a Nickelodeon. Since then, we progressed through the 10, the 15
That's
cent,
right here.
and the 35-cent stage. The operation has been quite successful. But of course today, like all picture business, has somewhat slowed up, but shows signs again of renewing activity. However, at my age, there's very little that I can look forward to in the way of a great future in this business for myself.
I don't know about that. I know you and the rest of these hardy pioneers, you seem almost to be perennials. They're just no giving up.
Well, when you're interested in what you're doing, it becomes a part of you, and you don't give up so easily things that belong to you.
Now, the Majestic you were talking about, that first theater, is still right here.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be a vaudeville house, and the house was a 25-foot situation, and the stage was so small that when we got a big wire rack, and they booked some big ones in those days off of the Pantages circuit, they would have to stake the wire out in the next lot in order for the performers to perform on the stage in the theater. The west door was large enough to allow that. And of course we had elephants and everything of that kind on the stage, but I didn't have the theater at that time. I didn't take it over until after a tour of a 10, 20, 30 cent tour of a 10, 20, 30 cent comic opera troupe, of which one of the leading comedians was Harry Wolf, a member of the old-time Wolf family here,
I recall.
D. Wolf and
the
Sons,
name.
who were in the liquor business also. Following this, motion pictures came in, and we took over during the motion picture era.
Must have been rather exciting. I think I've said that before, but still, in the theater business in those days, and particularly, you might say, the uncertainty of it in the show business and so forth.
Well, now to preface that, let me say this: that my determination to go into the show business was prompted by the fact that I went on as a supernumerary in the old Oberholzer Opera House, which was at the corner of Grand and Robinson, upstairs. And during the play of Ole Olson, I had the pleasure and stimulation of being wheeled on and off the stage in a wheelbarrow while the comedians made fun with each other. I considered myself quite a success and decided that that was for me. After getting out of the clothing business, I turned to the theater business, having in a measure inherited the theater with my father. And we carried on the operation, which has now extended over 51 years. My father, however, passed in 1932, and I have conducted it since that time.
How about your mother? How long did she
My
live?
mother lived until 1938. She, as I said, helped my father in the butcher business and then became the proverbial housewife. They were a very lovely couple, representative of the pioneer spirit, and I'm very proud of them. Following my taking over the theater, prior to my taking over the theater, Mr. Powell and I became very friendly, and he suggested me as the president of the Theater Owners of Oklahoma, which I assumed after I became one of the theater owners. This job lasted for a period of almost 35 years, and I graduated from that during the same tenure, however, into national theater work. And in 1938, I brought, and I say it reservedly, one of the finest conventions that the Theater Owners of America have ever held to Oklahoma City. Ed Kuykendall, the president of the Theater Owners of America, was my close personal friend, and he wished this job off upon me, and without knowing what I was assuming, without any funds pledged, we put on this show in 1938 with the assistance of the publicity of the Oklahoma News, which was very efficient and widespread, and we succeeded at the last moment in turning the tide by bringing a full plane load of Hollywood personalities to Oklahoma City. The king strike of the whole thing, however, was the procuring of Mickey Rooney, who at that time was top flight. Mickey came to Oklahoma City, and In order to get him into the Biltmore Hotel, he had to make a football rush to get into the door from the car that brought him up to the hotel. And he had a terrific time fighting off the young ladies who were anxious to see the wonder of the screen. Our convention was most successful, and we came out with $100 more than we started with, and we started with nothing. However, we paid all of our bills, and it was quite a number of years afterwards that the Washington group were still paying for the convention that was held in Washington, D.C. That was just a matter of luck, and a thing of which I, of course, am very proud. I stayed with the organization for a period of 13 years as its executive secretary. And in that time, I contacted some of the finest people in the amusement business in America. Many of them are still my close friends. It has been a long tour, and one which I could write a book about, I'm sure, if I would take time to do it. But my father and mother finally semi-retired and moved into a location on Northwest 17th Street, which was then our home. My wife and I, after marriage, moved into that home following the death of both of my parents, and in the last 5 or 6 years we've purchased a home at 1604 Drury Lane in Oklahoma City. This home reflects in part the cultural aspect of my wife and things which I have absorbed through association with her. We have an old colonial Georgian home which is filled with a great collection of French antiques of the 17th century and the 18th century vintage. And I believe it is the finest collection of its kind in the Southwest. We have ample space there. We have a yardage of 175 by 250 feet, and our garden plot is wonderfully well planted, and we have 15 or more marble statues and a few concrete statues with them in our yard. Our entrance has 2 beautiful marble statues, one of Cupid and the other of Bacchus, the god of wine, on the shoulders of a satyr, which is a very fine piece of artwork. This, we feel, satisfies us from a cultural aspect, and we have a great many compliments from our friends who visit us at various times and enjoy the beauties of our home. While retirement hasn't come to me yet, I get a great deal of pleasure out of musing with the arts and the periods that have gone by. And my wife is a perfectionist, and everything that we have in our home has to be complete and perfect. And there's nothing in there that isn't usable. Although at first the home appeals to many as being the aspect of a museum, the living with these things is delightful and beautiful, and I'll guarantee isn't taxing upon your nerves.
You seem to enjoy it, and obviously, as you said, usable, and you live in that home too.
That's right. Well, that in a cursory way covers a few of the highlights of the time that has been spent in Oklahoma City, every moment of which I have enjoyed.
Well, there doesn't seem to be any question about that, because you just, and as I say, retirement, that's out of the question as far as you're concerned, Mr. Lowenstien.
I think that's quite true.
You would miss it, and too many of your friends with whom you've been associated for so many years would miss you too much.
Well, I'm proud of the friends that I have, and all of them seem to be very responsive when they have an opportunity. And I believe that as you live, so comes your reward while you're still here on earth to a great extent. And if this little interview has been of any interest to those who may hear it later on, I am certainly happy to have been able to make the contribution, and assure you that I hope that more of you will have the experience of being pioneers in some field.
Well, I'm sure that during the course of the usage of tapes of this sort by students who are studying history, particularly of Oklahoma City, by student workshops and other universities throughout the country, who perhaps are preparing papers on what happened in Oklahoma during the course of 1889 on through, they'll want to listen to these, and not only will they hear of the events that took place, but also the marvelous thing is they have the voice of the individual that who has been engaged in making Oklahoma City history. It's we still have some time. If you have some time, I don't want to tire you.
I have ample time, and I'm glad to give you any information that I'm capable of giving, and I want to repeat that I'm proud to be a part of Oklahoma Christian College's idea of perpetuating the past for the benefit of the future.
And it's a progressive type of thing that they're doing, in that although eventually a great deal of this will be written and will become permanent as far as print is concerned, but there aren't too many people who have been progressive enough thinking to say, well, let's get it audible so that we can listen to this. Mm-hmm. And in other words, it gives it more of another dimension, more of a life dimension.
There's one other facet that I have failed to mention that I am particularly proud of also, and that's the fact that I have been for many years a member of the 89ers Association, mm-hmm. which is the founding group, those that are left of them, of Oklahoma. This association is in need of a great deal more support than it's getting. There was a time when they expected to take over the Oberholzer home and make it a museum of Oklahoma history. Mm-hmm. This hasn't materialized. But it's something that we still can think about. Having been a member of this organization, I have moved up to the vice presidency, and on several occasions have turned down the presidency because I find that I have enough to keep me busy without taking out the responsibility of an organization. If I had nothing else to do, or it was less limited in my time, I'd be very happy to make this contribution. However, I am proud of the fact that I was the chairman of the I don't want to use the word monument, the memorial committee of the 89ers, and through the kind assistance of Mr. Morris and Tucker of the Liberty National Bank, we worked out a plan whereby Mr. B.D. Eddy, a newcomer as compared with my time in Oklahoma City, but a very charitable and understanding gentleman, donated the claim stake statue, which now stands as one of the outstanding features of our civic center. Mm-hmm. This statue was cast in Mexico and is an outstanding work of art and something which will live for many, many years to come. It is the only thing of any great consequence that has been given to the pioneers for their efforts of the early day times. And it is most commendable and something which I am sure anyone will be very happy to see and to study and to enjoy.
We had a long discussion with Mr. Eddy the other day, although as he of course doesn't reach back as far as some of you and your compatriots, but however his family did go back a few years, and there isn't any question that down through the years he has been most generous in returning to Oklahoma City, as he said, at least some of the feeling that and the help that they gave.
I sincerely believe that is his motivation, mm-hmm. because people don't give away thousands of dollars unless they have some interest in the thing that they're mm-hmm. giving to.
Well, don't you feel that that's rather general in this town, and it's unusual too?
I think it's increasing. Mm-hmm. I think people are now really beginning to realize what has gone before them and things that they have participated in that probably the opportunity will never come again to other people, and they want to become a part of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that spirit should be carried on.
You walk around town today now, and you're always in the midst of something to do with your Kiwanis activity and everything else in which you're engaged. What's your reaction today, on this, say, the 22nd of February, 1965? How do you feel about the city?
I think it has great possibilities, and I have never seen the advancements that are being made, the chances, I might say, that are being taken, the opportunities that are coming to people who are alert and active and who are trying to do something to make this the hub of the Southwest, which in reality is quickly becoming. It's amazing to go out into these sections that I knew as prairie.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of prairie, when I came to Oklahoma City, the Choctaw Street on the south was the boundary line, the Santa Fe Railroad on the east, Walker Street on the west, and the south side of 7th Street on the north,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very, very small area as compared with its 600 and some miles of expanse today. And I still am amazed as I drive out and see the progress and the building and the improvement that is going on every side of Oklahoma City and its environs. I see nothing that will keep it from being one of the greatest cities of the Southwest. I think the time shall come that perhaps we'll catch up with Dallas and
Mhm.
Houston. Our new waterway should give hope for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that might retard us for a short time is the catching up of the confidence of the people in building so many beautiful housings that Oklahoma City is now receiving.
Mm-hmm.
I rather feel that it's being overbuilt, but in the early days I had a real estate man tell me that you're overbuilt, you're built for a city of 25,000, but you'll be the leading city of Oklahoma City because of the progressiveness and the foresight of the people that are in here at this time. And I think that reflects the situation today very aptly.
Well, you and your cohorts like, Mr. Overholzer, Mr. Colkert, and, there's just any number of them. And, of course, there's always, he wasn't here in the beginning, but it seems almost like Stanley Draper's been here since it started.
That's right.
He was brought here by Mr. Overholzer, wasn't he?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
By Mr. Ed Overholzer, the son of Mr. Henry Overholzer. Ed Overholzer was the owner of the Overholzer Theater following his father, and was really one of the early establishers of theater entertainment in Oklahoma City. Now, there's one thing I've overlooked that I do want to comment on,
What's that, sir?
and I'll go back to my home for just a moment.
Surely.
With the explanation of our French antiques and their beauty and all that, I overlooked our west upstairs room, which is referred to as our Red Room. In this I have conserved the early day furniture of my father and mother.
Oh.
The living room suite that they brought here from Texas, the old bed, the dresser, the washstand
Mm-hmm.
with the usual accoutrement that went into the little drawer on the bottom side. And people who come into our home, while they're thrilled with our antiques, the majority of them are more than thrilled with the Red Room, because that represents an era that they understand. It's the furniture of early American and early Victorian, which their grandfather and grandmother gave to their fathers and mothers, and they have a connection with it that can never be equaled by anything that probably came from another country.
I think that is quite a contribution. Too often, many of those items that are equally as important, their value is gauged now in the personal feelings that you have for
That's
them,
right.
rather than in their monetary return. They wind up in a second-hand store or in somebody's junkyard as opposed to being preserved. That is quite a bit of history that you have there.
Well, speaking of junkyard, I'm impressed with the sign I saw over on the highway to El Reno, and an old place where they were selling antiques, and they had a sign out in front,
Uh-huh.
and they said, if you think this is junk, price it.
That's quite a business all in itself, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Well, this is a historic spot in which we're sitting, this old majestic theater here, and it's still cranking right along, isn't it?
This theater was our home in the early days.
Uh-huh.
We lived behind the store.
Uh-huh.
We took our bath in the bathtub,
Uh-huh.
which was a portable affair made of sheet metal,
Yeah.
heated the water on the old cook stove, which at that time had graduated to a majestic range with a water box on the side
Right.
of copper and Manel metal.
Uh-huh.
And of course we had outside accommodations,
Uh-huh.
and we got our water from a well before the city water supply was brought in here. And our front sidewalk was board sidewalk. The street was not paved, and I've seen the time when it took two horses to pull you from Main to Grand Avenue if you had any kind of a load in your vehicle.
Oh, this has been
So
marvelous.
those are days to come through that I look back upon with a great deal of pleasure and recollection. Speaking of the progress of Oklahoma City, I must refer to the fact that the recent destruction of the old Warner Theater, previously the Oberholzer Theater, which was our early day opera house.
Yes, sir.
I've had so many people regretful of the fact that this old landmark had been torn down. Fact of the matter is, I think it was still equal to the time and could have been used for other theatrical purposes to a much greater advantage than will now be the opportunity. Of course, this has made way for the proverbial parking lot, which is now the solution to city life. This old theater and its destruction was really a tribute to construction in Oklahoma City up in pioneer days. This theater was built in the 1900s, probably during the first quarter of the century. And in taking it down, there have been few buildings in Oklahoma City that had the resistance that this old place gave the people who were removing it. It was amazing to study the balcony construction and see the steel and iron that had been put into that and the circular posts that supported it. There would never have been a chance for a cave-in catastrophe in that theater coming from the building of this section of the Opera House. It is difficult to give these things up. It reminds you of losing an old friend, and really is touching.
I've noticed, I had a short experience, short compared to yours, as far as the theater business, about 5 years, as a matter of fact, with Shine's. Shine's Theaters, back through Ohio,
New York.
Kentucky, and New York, Gloversville, New York. And during my course of my tour with them, and as a manager, I ran into some fine old opera houses that we used as what they used to call the B houses then, you know. Run them on weekends, particularly with the Western movies and so forth. Sons of the Pioneers and William Boyd. That the sound in those old opera houses, as they were called, was magnificent. The acoustics, for some reason or another, other than the fact that they were built that way for the voice, the natural voice and natural projection, was as close to being as normal as anything could be.
Of course, there are so many changes occurring in Oklahoma City, as I said before, that it's hard to prophesy what's going to happen. And right now, of course, the pie plan is being projected. Whether this is acceptable or not, there isn't any question but that the city will keep up with the times.
Well, it's absolutely essential that something be done to retain the interest in the core of the city.
Well, the movement of traffic today is a big problem. And as I see it, downtown Oklahoma City is suffering at the present time from lack of parking spaces. And I say this rather reverently. I don't like to criticize anyone else's conduct of their business, but there is going to have to be something done to bring in a cheaper or a free parking situation before the women will come back down to do their shopping in our downtown centers. I'm hopeful that the city will see its way clear to bring in some municipal parking on a practical basis, free if possible, because with these outlying shopping centers where parking isn't a problem, where it's all free, it's quite difficult to come down to Oklahoma City and spend from 25 to 80 cents for the privilege of probably spending 50 cents in one of the downtown stores. This, I think, is really the crux of the situation. And if the merchants who are spending money in earnest efforts to restore trade would turn their efforts to bringing the trade downtown on a basis where they could afford, we might say, and whether they can afford it or not, people are just resentful of the fact that they have to pay for something that they can get somewhere else for nothing. And I think that that is the solution to the future prosperity of downtown Oklahoma City, regardless of what source it comes through.
That's presented an increasing problem as the age of the automobile has increased. And
shut down for just a minute. Let's see if I can pick up anything else.